deemed necessary for this mission?
It was not deemed necessary for this mission.
Say, where was the
Longitude?
Just below the point of South America there, Paul.
The bulge in that area.
Due south of that.
You mentioned that you should be able to generate around 25 amps per hour, and you have to divide that out against the loads. Will there be sufficient power for the transponders so that you can get a good track on the spacecraft?
I will be able to bring them up when we need to, and I believe that we'll have that kind of power. I really don't have that close a handle on the power. We came over here before we had all those details worked out to that level.
As long as, with the Omnis and the 220-foot dishes, I don't think we'll have any problem there.
Also, I appreciate that you haven't any thought of what might have happened.
No, not yet. Stratification is something that typically happens in these tanks, and it's nothing that we haven't seen before. Right now, I have absolutely no clue to what happened. We had something...
It was pretty widespread, we know.
Rather violent happened in Bay 4, we think. Something happened to the fuel cells in the oxygen tank, and they were down in that area. It was a rather violent kind of thing because it apparently reset some of the check valves in the RCS quads, which are susceptible to shock. But as far as what exactly happened, I have no idea.
Chris, are you confident that you have enough power under the current configuration to bring the Apollo back in?
Yes, but I think we'll have to be very frugal in how we use it, and that's what you've probably heard some of the discussions back and forth between the crew. We were trying to consider whether we would keep the platform up, for instance, between now and the time you go behind the moon, in order to maintain that alignment so that they wouldn't have to do another alignment when they get ready to do the burn on the dips and so on. So it will have to be very carefully used between here and Splash.
And how do you feel in point of concern between now and Gemini 8?
Well, I guess I would have to say I feel a great deal more concerned. We're still something like 70 to 80 hours away from the Earth. And in Gemini 8, we were never more than an hour and a half to get to a recovery point and never more than 20 minutes to land.
Okay. Carl will take the one back in and move up this way again.
At the time that you left, what was the situation with regard to venting to the outside and motions of the spacecraft from that? Was there any?
I don't know. I can't recall.
The venting had been decreasing, and if we were leaking probably from that bay, and if it looked like the pressures were all dropping, so that I would assume that the venting had gone down, but it was a little difficult to tell from the conversation. I would assume that its venting had decreased considerably.
You were not getting any particular rates anymore at the time you were leaving?
Not that I recall. I think they had the LEM RCS system up, and so it would be difficult to tell even then whether they did have any rates.
They were transitioning from one spacecraft control system to another and running back and forth through the tunnel and aligning the platform. There's an awful lot of activity going on, and we didn't ask them what the rates were.
I believe I heard Fred Hayes mention that it might be considered to use a deep space abort in order to immediately get the burn over with and power down the LEM so you wouldn't have that drain in keeping it powered up till they get around the moon. Has this been completely disregarded now?
We can't, the position we are now on the Earth-Moon plane, we have to go around the moon to get back if we're going to use the DIPS engine. You would have had enough capability with the SBS engine, but of course we don't dare use that now. So we have to go to the backside of the moon and come back.
I have a question in three parts. First of all, if they do choose the Pacific method of recovery, will the recovery point be changed from original planning, or will it still be the same?
I think it's moved west and south some. I think it's about 165 degrees west and some 20 degrees south. It is farther south and farther west than the end of Mission land.
With this, the other two questions kind of combined. If you did land in the Atlantic, and you did have to go to a ship of opportunity, would you hesitate at all to ask any ship of any nation?
No, sir, I wouldn't.
Will this necessitate future thinking toward a backup recovery fleet in the Atlantic?
We certainly will reassess that, yes, sir.
Have one in the back there.
Chris, will you come in at 400K, and will there be any problem in jettisoning the limb at
No.
entry, or
All that's
what will
done-
be that mechanics?
It's done the same way as it is around the moon, and the same way coming back from the moon with the service module. You have pyrotechnic batteries and separate pyrotechnic lines, electrical sources, which are dependent only on those power sources. So we don't have any problems there in terms of separation. Now, the dynamics, mechanics of the thing would not be a problem either.
For Jim McDivitt, is a situation like occurred in Bay 4 something that might have occurred if it was hit by a meteoroid? And for Chris Kraft, in following up your earlier comments, do you feel they have a good chance to make it back?
Well, you asked me first. There was something which appeared to be quite violent that occurred in Bay 4, and yes, if you were struck by a meteor, it would be quite violent. I'm not assuming that's what happened, Mark, but that could have done it.
Yes, I think their chances are excellent at the moment, assuming that the lunar module continues to operate well.
Can you think of anything else that might cause such a violent event as besides a meteor?
No, we could probably think of an infinite number of things that could.
Well, 2 or 3 that would be
Well-
within the realms of likelihood, I mean.
I guess there are a lot of things that could have happened. It would be just pure conjecture. Anything that's down there that's pressurized could have let go, and there are all kinds of pressurized things. There are pressurized hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, fuel cells. It's a very complicated bay that this happened in.
Right, Hill.
What is the moment that you have to get everybody out of the limb and back into the command module and seal it off and get ready for entry? I mean, how late can you continue to use the limb before you have to go to the batteries on the command module?
It's pretty late. It doesn't take too long to get back in the CSM. The thing that you want to make sure is that you have adequate time to put the hatch in and blow the limb off, and that really doesn't take very long.
I'm sure that will be a process where a couple of them will get back in the CSM, get everything set up, and they'll do that as late as possible.
I guess we'd have to work that out. 30 minutes or hour or 15 minutes or some range like that.
We want to start using the CSM batteries as late as possible.
Okay, we're going to come up the middle. Harry?
On the present trajectory, how far beyond the moon will they go before they start to hook back? And what would the miss distance at the Earth be without a correcting burn from the dips?
Well, in the present trajectory, we would come within about 60 nautical miles of the backside of the moon. We are not on a free return trajectory at present. It would take a very small burn, say in the next 5 or 10 hours, to get us back on a free return on the order of 20 to 40 feet per second. I can't answer your second question about how far we'd miss. I don't know.
Right here.
Will the dips burn be the major rocket maneuver you will make on coming back, and if so, where will it be? On the far side of the moon? Or
It'll be on the far. Yes, it will be the dips. It will be on the some place between Paraloon on the far side of the moon and 2 hours after that.
Pick these up coming up the middle of the aisle. We'll just take them both sides. All right, Paul, go ahead.
Do you recall the approximate mileage at which points you could still do a deep space abort and come back? What is the crossover? 140, 150,000?
It's probably farther than that, Paul. I don't remember the exact number, but if I think at the time of this incident, if you'd used the SPS engine, you could just about have done it, but it would have taken just about the whole thing.
176,000.
Something like that. Yeah.
If I recall, Paul, I think the number was 9,000 foot per second and about 140 hours.
What would cause you to choose the Atlantic over the Pacific for recovery? And are you now surveying the Atlantic to find out what ships are available to you?
Yes, we are surveying the Atlantic to find out what ships are available. I think the only reason you go to the Atlantic, if sometime between now and the burn, something would happen to make you very time critical in getting back.
Burn more quickly or sooner?
No, it's a bigger burn to go to the Atlantic. It's about 2,000 or 1,900 feet per second, and gets you back some 9 hours earlier.
How many feet per second?
It's about 900.
Let's come up there. Here, we have this gentleman in the middle of the row there, in the khaki jacket.
In the transcript, and I'd like to read from this, Lovell says, yes, I've got to put the cabin reprint valve in there. Every time he does that, our hearts jump in our mouths. Now, I don't understand what he's talking about here, but could this have anything to do with the accident? If something happened that made their hearts jump in their mouths, what would...
Pressure. No. I guess I don't understand the
It
question.
didn't, what you're asking is, did that,
Well, we have people working at it right now, and I don't know whether we'll ever be able to tell exactly what happened there or not. We're reducing the data like we do on all of the space flights and whenever we have an anomaly, and to date we've been quite successful in determining what happened. Whether or not we are in this case, I have no idea. We're certainly going to do the best job that we can. Well, sometimes it takes a long time. I have no idea on this. I haven't seen the data myself at all. We were trying to figure out what to do rather than to play out the old data.
and that's what we'll be doing till we get them back on the water, is concentrating on everything that is their lives are dependent upon at the moment rather than worrying about the accident, because there's nothing we can do about that now. The service module is no longer useful in most cases because the oxygen is depleted. So other than the fact that you've got some propulsion left and the batteries in the command module, and we're going to worry about those situations from now to splash.
Initially, we were trying to find out what was wrong down there so we could possibly correct it before we lost the oxygen. We weren't able to do that in time, and I think that we'll put that effort on a very low priority right now and work on the other stuff. Pardon? No hints.
What about your thermal control situation? Do you expect any problems from heat because of your configuration now?
Well, we're not going to be able to just maintain a single attitude hold all the way to the moon and back. We're going to have to do something, and we've been working on that. I guess the guys are working on that now, aren't they?
I don't think we can answer that question truthfully because we've never had a situation where we've not had powered up conditions in the command module and powered conditions in the LEM, so that's probably going to be a real-time situation.
Chris, at the risk of asking you to oversimplify a very complex situation, and certainly I don't mean this facetiously, is there any concern, real concern, can you get them back, taking into consideration all the imponderables, the power, the oxygen, the landing area, and all this sort of thing? Is this...
If the situation remains stable as it is at the moment, there's no question but what we have the thing under control and we can return the crew safely to the Earth. Now, we're going to have to make some compromises in procedures as how you do that, but that can be done. We've got a number of different ways of doing things, like re-entry. If we couldn't, for instance, get the platform up, we have what we call the entry monitoring system. We can enter at constant G if we had to with no entry monitoring system. If everything remains as is, we can get them back successfully. Now, if there was some change in the status of the lunar module, then that might mean something else, and we will keep you appraised of that situation.
All right, right here, and then...
What can you anticipate that might happen that already hasn't happened? Can you give us an indication of what could happen?
Well, you might have some problem with some system in the lunar module that would put us in a very serious situation, like a leak in the oxygen system or something that would happen to the electrical power.
There's no indication now that there's anything wrong with the LEM. It's performing properly, and like Chris said, if everything works the way it is now, there's no doubt that they'll come back all right.
Okay.
What time did the accident occur?
I don't have an exact
guess
time. It must have been about 56 hours.
Yeah, 55 and a half to 56 hours in that time period. I didn't...
All right.
Mark.
The crew being wearing their space suits, or will they be shirt sleeve, or how will they be traveling the rest of the trip?
Well, they're shirt sleeves right now. I would guess they'd probably stay shirt sleeves. I see no reason to go back to the suits.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, we're gonna take these two here, then we're gonna come back on this side.
Jim, I'm not clear on what the venting did to the spacecraft's attitude and pitch roll in yaw.
Well, he had a negative pitch and a negative roll, and that's one of the clues that we had that something happened in Bay 4, in addition to the fact that we had all these other anomalies to the equipment that's in there. It meant that it was pitching nose down and it was rolling to the left.
I think the other thing you have to remember is that we have certain instrumentation that we can believe or not believe. I mean by that when you have something like this happen, you don't know that you're not reading false information from some of the instruments. So you have to look at those and see how they failed, et cetera, and see what the measurements are, see which direction they went when they began to fail to see whether you're reading true information.
All right, this one, and then we're gonna come back on.
Chris, could you put this in a somewhat larger perspective? It seems obviously that if this happened on the way back, the situation would be critical. I mean, it would be fatal.
Indeed it would.
You discuss this thing from the standpoint of the resources you're left with when it fails at this point in the mission.
Well, and any time that you still have the lunar module in the condition that we have it in this case, where we've not used any of its consumables, then we're in a very good situation. We've always called the LEM a good lifeboat under those circumstances. If at any time in the mission, however, the LEM had separated and we had gotten ourselves into a rendezvous situation or the command module being around the moon, then what you state is absolutely true. It would be a fatal situation.
What is the critical consumable? Water, lithium hydroxide, oxygen, electrical power, or what? And how long will it last?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it varies on how you use them. If you turn everything off, then electrical power is not a problem, but of course we have to use it. Oxygen we have more than a sufficient quantity, and the LEM is self-sufficient except for the lithium hydroxide. We're going to have to be using lithium hydroxide out of the CSM to maintain the CO2 level at a lower level. So from that standpoint, we have to use both the command module and the LEM. From an electrical standpoint and an oxygen standpoint, we can use the LEM alone.
Enough water?
Yes.
When the fuel cells aren't functioning?
Yes, the LEM has a large amount of water that it carries. The LEM cooling is done by water. It uses a sublimator rather than radiators, so we'd be using that water for cooling, and there is enough.
Plus we have some
The individual life support system packs that were meant for the moonwalk, can they be used inside of the spaceship?
Yes.
All right, one in the very back, and then...
Any thought given to cutting down communications to conserve electrical power? To setting a timeline of we'll talk to you with us and so at such hour?
I don't think it makes that much difference.
And at this time, I don't think we have to do that.
Right.
Initially, we wanted to get the spacecraft configuration under control so we knew where we were. And as I said, we've got to average about 25 amps or something on that order, plus or minus a few amps. And it's better to burn a few extra amps right now, figure out what you're going to do, and have all the capability of taking things out later. But you want to make sure that you've got a condition you can live with now.
I might say that if when we're in a condition where we don't have the 220-foot dish, communications may be somewhat sporadic without the high-gain antenna, which we would probably not want to bring up because of power reasons in the LEM.
I know it's probably a little premature, but seeing they have had a rough time, have you worked out any schedules for a sleep period for any of the astronauts?
No, I think this is a little premature for that.
Mary?
Chris, if the LEM continues to operate well, what is your, when the systems and the power and all that kind of jazz, what is your primary concern? Do you have any concern about the spacecraft, things working sufficiently in it to bring it back?
No. I think that with the ground situation that we have, that is the tracking we have from the ground, and the maneuvers that we can give them from the ground, I think that we're perfectly satisfied that that situation is well under control.
Would extreme weather conditions affect your choice of landing sites, and do you have any idea what the weather will be like in the landing sites?
I haven't looked at the weather yet, but we would still have range control during reentry, some hundreds of miles, perhaps 1,000.
What will the procedures be for the rest of the night?
They are not defined yet.
All right.
Chris, you were in a catbird seat on John Glenn in a retro pack that didn't come off, Scott Carpenter in an overshoot, Dave Scott in a stuck thruster. How would you, and forgive me if I put you on the spot, but how would you classify this situation as regards to these that we are familiar with a little bit?
I'd say this is as serious a situation as we have ever had in manned space flight.
This man in the corner is.
Jim, two questions. One, with the situation of using the lithium hydroxide in the lunar module, will there be any chance that the air might get stuffy at all before this is out? And could you paint a picture for us of what it's like in the command module with it powered down? What does Swigert, whoever's in there, see? Is it just the lights from the computer, or the disk keep blinking, or what?
Well, we'll first let me answer the one about the lithium hydroxide. We'll be using the lithium hydroxide out of the LEM, and then we'll be using some out of the command module, then some out of the LEM, then some out of the command module, trying to keep the environments in both spacecraft acceptable. The disk key has been turned off. The command module is powered down now, so there won't be any lights in it at all. They'll be using this flashlight. We have 3 re-entry batteries in the command module, and we have no way of recharging these things now with the fuel cells gone, so we don't want to waste any of this valuable electrical power by running unnecessary equipment in the command module. Now, we do have the capability of powering some things in the command module from the LEM as long as we keep this power.
We want to satisfy ourselves that we've done the best we can before we launch again. I believe that in terms of the landing sites, we will probably reconvene and go through our landing site selection again to make sure we're satisfied that that is true. I think we've done that enough now, however, that we can probably come pretty close to laying out the sites that we'd like to go to.
Would you think that the 6-month hiatus between shots that you've laid out for yourself now would be sufficient to get a handle on what was wrong with the service module and correct it? Or do you think that there might be a delay, a stretch out as a result of that?
Well, I think that's very difficult to answer, Bill. Let me say this. I don't think we would hesitate to wait a longer period of time than 6 months if we were not satisfied.
The dips burn that has been referred to, would that have to occur behind the moon out of radio contact, or could you fix it so that you could perform it in radio contact?
It could be in radio contact, possibly.
Here.
On the backup systems, the way the various backup systems, as far as moving into the LEM and the various systems that have backed themselves up, the emergency systems, are you satisfied with the way they've worked? And is this giving you an insight into things that might be needed in future flights? Even more backup systems that would back up some of these possibly that have now failed?
Well, the command and service module was designed to be an independent spacecraft, and we built the redundancy into the spacecraft. Whatever happened today was one of those cases that's very difficult to design for. We had something happen which was a major consequence down in that bay, I think, because of the multitude of things that occurred when you lose 2 fuel cells and an oxygen tank, and the oxygen runs out of the other, and all that. That's something very significant. It'd be very difficult to design against that. We were fortunate that we're on the way to the moon with the LEM on board, or LEM attached.
So I wanted to ask about, you say that on the return flight this could have been extremely critical. Are you thinking now in terms of something to do in the event this should occur on a return flight?
I think that would be pretty near impossible to do at this time with that vehicle.
Okay, one here, and then we're going to take Mary, then we're going to have to close it up.
Did the fact that you went into a hybrid trajectory yesterday, pulling you out of free return, is that going to cause you any troubles in trying to get back around the moon?
No, as I said earlier, we're not on a free return right now, but it would only take a maneuver of about 20 to 40 feet per second to get you back on a free return. That could be done in, say, 5 or 10 hours from now, if we chose to do that.
Chris and Jim, do you have any feeling of how the crew feels, and also Marilyn and Mary on this situation?
I would only guess that the crew feels that the situation is under control, that they were in a serious condition, and they knew they had a job to do, and I don't think they stopped to consider what their personal feelings were at the moment. You'll have to wait and see how they felt about it themselves. As far as the wives are concerned, I'm sure Deke Slayton has talked to them, but we have not.
I think when you're in a spot like that where you're busy and you have a lot of things to do, I think you just go ahead and do them. And the crew's been jumping back and forth between spacecraft and powering systems up and down and maneuvering around quite ably in the spacecraft, and they've had the situation well in hand. So I think they've been probably too busy to sit back and...
Certainly they have remained very calm and responsive to the discussions from the ground, and I'd say they have the situation well under control.
We're going to continue to schedule these briefings throughout the mission whenever there's a point where we think interpretation would help, and we'll be back again, but I think we ought to get back to mission control now.
One quick one. If you went